Welcome to It's Just a Guy Thing, the podcast where we create space for real conversations about men's mental health, identity, relationships, and healing. And today, I'm very fortunate to have a special guest. Her name is Rachael Kariuki that I'm going to introduce here shortly. Our topic today is we're going to delve into a topic that's pretty close to my heart, and that's about the father wound. And just for sake of definition, the father wound refers to the deep emotional pain that results from a father's absence, abandonment, or neglect, or abuse, and it can show up in so many different ways. It can show up in terms of low self-esteem, fear of failure, to struggles in intimacy, and also in emotional regulation. Now, I'm going to quote a book that we talked about during our last episode, Rachel, which is The Body Keeps the Score, where Dr. Basil talks about trauma isn't just an event that happened in the past, but it leaves a physical imprint on the body and the nervous system, and it gets stored, and then sometimes it's even passed on. So we'll touch briefly also on some of the psychological concepts like Carl Jung, where he talks about how the father wound affects our internal archetypes, what he calls that, the inner critic and the wounded child, or even how we relate to authority or even God. But we just don't want to dwell on the pain today. Our conversation also wants to center around healing, and that's why we're lucky to have you. So I couldn't think of a better person to speak with than you, Rachael, having understood that you're a social worker, you're also a therapist, someone who has both professional but also personal, probably lived experience that you can share with us. So Rachael, welcome to the podcast. And for those who do not know, I would like who you are or what you do. Could you kindly start by introducing yourself? Tell us who you are, who's Rachael Kariuki, what do you do, and that type of thing. Welcome.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for having me here, especially. And, obviously, being here is so, I guess, very important, but also it's really, really important for us to be talking about these to be having these conversations within our community, as obviously African Australians here living here in Australia, and in particular Adelaide. And earlier before about, yes, there's lots of podcasts that have been done out there, but it's so good for us to have something that's our own, within our own context here in Adelaide, and having these conversations in our community in particular, when people within the community are seeing people who they are familiar with, having these conversations so important to creating awareness, but also to I guess getting people to know that, what some of these really psychological concepts mean, or, how they can get help, and how that relates to them in particular, because there are people with similar contexts as we do as well. So thank you for having me, and thank you for, doing this podcast, because it's quite important for us. So I'm Rachael, obviously, as he said. My job is a job of a social worker. I'm trained as a social worker. And what that means is, so as a social worker, I'm trained to understand systems within the context of, based on, so I'll redo that again.
That's okay.
So as a social worker, you are trained to look at individual within the context that they live in. So for example, in other professions where they're helping professions like, psychology, psychotherapy, and things like that, as opposed to those professions, social work looks at systems and contexts where people come from, and how those contexts sort of impact the individual.
Okay.
So, for instance, myself, I'll give myself as an example. I can never, as a social worker, I can't look at a person like myself and just look at just the individual self. So especially for us as people of ethnic communities, if you go to a service, you need to be looked at as a person who comes from a context of community, a context of a family, a context of a society as a whole. Okay. So that's why I was talking earlier about and especially for migrants within in this country, we are not just individuals as we are. We come from a collective context, and I guess that those are some of the differences that social work theories sort of distinguish people within the Australian context. In the Australian context, say white Australians, for example, are very individualistic in the context that they come from. But us, within the African context, also, say Aboriginal people, for example, we come from a context where we see ourselves as collectives. So what happens with social work is we look at people not just as individuals, but we have to consider the context of families, schools, the society that they're in, and how those other social contexts sort of impact who they are and how they walk through the world. So all of that to say that, for me, practicing as a social worker and as a therapist, that's also the way I practice. So I will, social workers are trained to work within, they can do community work, they can be therapists, for example, as I do. They can practice using within obviously organizations where they're doing case management, where they're linking people to help. And the job of a social worker is basically to walk alongside people as to get the help that they need, but to also empower people to be able to build their own capacity, to be able to do life on their own independently. Because I think there's a bit of a misconception that social workers just help people. That's a very simplistic way of looking at social work. And I'd like to sort of, I guess, explain it in the sense of our job is not just to help people, it's also to build, to empower them, to build their capacity to be able to walk their own journeys on their own. And within my role as a therapist, for example, I do that within therapy rooms, whereby I see parents and children, and we talk about some of the things that are happening within their homes, and within that context of a parent and a child, we sort of find healing and recovery of the trauma that may have happened within a home or within a community, and sort of that's the context I operate from currently.
All right, thank you so much, Rachael. It sounds exciting. I'm just curious. You've been here. How long have you been in Australia? Just curious.
I've been in Australia 12 years
at least 12
now, I think.
Years. So that's relatively. It's a long time, I would say. Relative. What drew you into the work of social work and therapy? How would you answer that question?
It's actually a funny story that I tell people because I came here in 2013 and I came here to do a Master's of International Business.
In social work? Business and social work? Or they're not related?
No, it was completely unrelated. So,
well, money.
People do make money off social work. So if I decided to make a bit of money in social work, I'm still okay. So I was fascinated when I came in. Obviously, I came for a Master's in International Business, but I became very fascinated with the Australian context, human and social services. So as most Kenyans that come to this country as students, you get part-time work. So for example, for myself, I started working in aged care. So when I started working in aged care, in Kenya, I only knew of one nursing home that my parents were.
Where was that?
In Sagana. So
there's a nursing home in Sagana?
Yes, there is. And my parents were really heavily involved in that. So we sort of grew up, taking food to the old people who were in the nursing home. And it was a part of the Catholic Church there. So when I started working in aged care, I was like, what is going on here? Why is there so many nursing homes? And why don't we have this in Kenya? So I was really fascinated. And the person who was guiding me was like, I don't know whether you're going to be able to work in a nursing home. And I was like, I'm really, really excited about this. It was actually quite surprising for them. Mm-hmm. And I, one semester in, I asked, what is it that I can study to understand these systems, these social systems within Australia? Because they really fascinated me, because I also wondered, why don't we have this in Kenya? Which, that's where sort of my interest in all of this. And really, my family has always been quite involved in, whether it's helping people within, the community, the nursing home, older people who, I guess, were left on their own. We were quite involved in that. So I was really interested in it, but I had never thought of
making
specifically. Yes, exactly. So once, I was told, do social work and then you get to understand systems. And, it's been very interesting.
It's interesting. I didn't expect that answer. I thought, okay, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah. I guess with the point of therapy, where that therapy comes from is, so I've worked within my career. I have worked after I graduated, I worked within the family court system, so understanding the family relationship centers. So that's a whole system on its own, whereby if parents separate, there's a whole system that sort of supports post-separation of parents, and they support children up until you have to go to the family court. So there's a lot of social issues that, obviously social workers are involved in within that whole system. So that's the first system I sort of worked in. And then the second system, I worked with international students. I really, really enjoyed that, having been an international student, obviously. And, it's always different when you're supporting people or who, whereby you have had your own lived experience. Yeah. And then now, currently, I'm within the child protection system, which is also a huge system here, obviously very, very advanced if you'd compare that with Kenya. And the child protection system is not just the Department for Child Protection, it's also, there's a lot of other agencies that are involved in that. So there's the police, obviously, there's the health system as well. So I am within that child protection system currently. And within that child protection system, there is a lot of conversations about, obviously, if you are caught up within the child protection system, it means that there's really terrible things that have happened during the childhood, childhood period, which has obviously led to authorities being involved. And normally it's quite maybe chronic neglect, chronic abuse, acute sometimes, whereby there's injuries and things like that. Really, really intense things that happens to children. So we are part of responding to some of those things. And I guess, having been exposed to the level of childhood trauma within the work that I have done for the last 5 years, I think when you're exposed to so much of that, you wonder what then happens. You start learning about, obviously, recovery of trauma and healing of trauma. And I guess some of that work, some of the work that we do there, we do assessments as well as interventions, which means that we can assess what's happened so that we can sort of treat, intervene in different ways. Right. Yes.
And I don't know, I had this question, I'll just ask it anyway. I was just wondering, the fact that you grew up in Kenya and that you're an African living in Australia, how, if so, do you think your background affect or influence the work that you do here? Does it?
Oh, 100% it does. I think in the sense that, especially, so obviously having had a career of about 10 years up to now, say, for example, having worked in the international education system, I worked in that system because I had my own lived experience of being there.
Yeah.
But also now within the child protection system, I was very curious about. Again, it was about curiosity. That's what got me into that system as well, to be able to understand, I guess, the nuances of what childhood trauma was about. But also, I've also realized that in every single work that I do, and which, having with lots of colleagues who are social workers or psychologists that I work with, we do talk a lot about, this work, yes, takes from you, it's difficult work. You're dealing with a lot of human suffering, but you also get so much from it. You learn so much about yourself. You learn so much about your relationships. In child protection, I've learned so much about parenting, even though I'm not a parent yet. But in the context specifically of me being a Kenyan doing this work, I've been exposed to so much that, I would not have been in my own country, because these systems are not there, obviously, but also, in understanding my own in understanding my own childhood history, in understanding other people's childhood histories, it also has reflected. I've also had the opportunity to reflect on my own childhood history, and how within my context growing up in Kenya, how I was parented within that whole, there's a lot of the, as I said earlier at the beginning, you can never look at someone from a different culture and not consider their history, their historical context, which is, for example, for me, when I look at my own childhood history coming from Kenya, there is inevitably, I do an exercise with all my clients called doing the timeline of your life, to be able to map out the themes, the themes of your life and the patterns of your life and things like that. So I've done my own, obviously. And a good therapist will tell clients to do things that they also do for themselves as well. Okay. So being able to understand myself within the context that I come from, within my family, helps me also be empathetic to my clients. As well. I was giving an example about, so within my family history, for example, I am very close with my grandmother, so I would talk to her about her own history. So I've spoken to my parents about their parents' histories as well. So sort of after the colonial, there was obviously the colonial period whereby, my granddad and my grandmother were born then what happened after that. So it gives me a bit of an idea of some of the things that have happened. So after they were born, there was a lot of displacement where lots of their land was taken. How did that look like? They came together, they had 8 children each. And, how was that home life like? There's a lot of data that I get from that history. And I can see lots of themes that have also intergenerationally have come, are also present with us, with the way our parents raised us. A lot of childhood trauma, inevitably. Lots of our parents don't know. Like you talk about, sometimes I've spoken to my dad about, I think one day we were talking and he said, "Oh, you talk about you have childhood trauma. I raised you so well. Look at how well you turned out." Exactly. I was like, okay, job, Dad. Right? So there's so many things that obviously those previous generations.
So that affects the work you do.
Yes.
So next question. I'm sorry. I thought we'd had a lot of time. Our time is really flying. But let's get a bit deeper into the psychology here.
Yes.
So when many people hear trauma, and that was me as well, I think with our not last year, but the year before, we did the first mind and wellness event, and we did a childhood trauma.
Yes.
I think that's the first time that was the first time I looked at what trauma means. I know trauma, I work in intensive care as a nurse, right?
Yeah.
For me, trauma means
physical trauma.
Yeah, it's medical perspective.
Yes.
Now, but I know trauma can be invisible. It doesn't have to be dramatic. Tell us from your therapist perspective, what is trauma?
Yeah.
Because people hear trauma. I'm sure some people listen to this podcast, hopefully,
Yeah.
And they may be thinking, oh yeah, someone got hit by a car. Oh, that was traumatic. What's trauma from a therapist's perspective?
So specifically when we talk about, so there's different types of trauma. So childhood trauma is what I deal with mostly, but also that develops into being a lot of psychopathology. So it eventually develops into a lot of mental health disorders as well. So in regards to childhood trauma is trauma that is repeated, that is chronic, that is ongoing, that is also cumulative. And this childhood trauma happens within a child's relationship with their parents. So specifically, trauma is any experience that a person experiences, but the impact of that makes them feel very, very alone. So you're overwhelmed by, so an experience happens to you, you're completely under the mercy of, you're completely overwhelmed by this experience. There's no way to process this experience because you're either on your own or, there's cumulative events that never get resolved at all. So and I guess, with physical trauma as well, it's really overwhelming. It's very impactful as well.
It is, yes.
Similar to a physical trauma, in the sense of quite overwhelming to the body, to the psyche, to the spirit. But also there's no way to process it.
Yeah.
It never gets resolved. And there is a sense of within childhood trauma whereby a child is all alone in their trauma. So they're overwhelmed.
Yeah.
They don't have anyone there with them, and with the context within a family context, or for a child.
Yeah.
I think Gabo Mate talks about you can never talk about a child on their own. So a child is always with a person, with a parent, with a caregiver of whatever kind. So if a child is experiencing a lot of incidences that are really overwhelming for their body, their mental health, and then they have no one to help them resolve that, then that's the stuff that gets stuck.
So it's a response. So there's an event and then there's a response. Because two individuals will come out different. Like one will experience the same event or respond to the same event very differently.
Very differently,
right?
correct.
So let me just segue that into my next question. I was just wondering, how then do you relate childhood traumas, and in this context, because I want to talk about father wounds, from father wounds to the adult life? How does that manifest in an adult's life? So I'm 40-something, I'm 50, someone is 60, but then you find that sometimes they're dealing with something that happened when they were 5, 6, or 7.
Yeah.
How's that manifestation, or what's the relationship there?
Yeah. So as I said, childhood trauma eventually develops over a lifetime. So when you're a child, it's childhood trauma. All of it is, I guess, relational trauma. So these are traumas that happens. It's trauma that happens within a relationship context.
Yes.
So that's the major thing, especially for lots of the traumas that we talk about with psychological trauma and things like that.
Correct.
Most of them, if it's not a single episode, PTSD episode, for example, if it's not a single incident, it's within a relationship, because, within also a relationship between a male and a female, there can also be trauma. It's also, which is also relational trauma. So how childhood trauma sort of works is, so you're in a family with them, say, just for simplistic purposes, mom and dad, child. So this child is exposed to physical abuse. You're being beaten all the time. You are being abused all the time, verbally abused all the time, emotionally abused, where you're invalidated. You're told, you're useless, or you're called different types of names.
Yes.
So what happens then is, as you're growing, you are trying to develop a sense of who you are. And if you're exposed to this environment and these relationships and you're having these experiences that are so demeaning, you're probably seeing your mom being beaten all the time. So it's like you are in so much threat, but you can never go anywhere.
True.
So there's so much threat. Right? Yes, there is so much danger that you live with every day. So there's something we call, so the bear comes home every morning, every night. So like, a father who's abusive, and they're coming home tonight, and you're probably going to be physically abused. You're going to be witnessing your mother be abused as well. The level of danger, the level of damage that has on a child, deep, whether it's the spirit, the psyche, all of that, is really, really intense and overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And yes, we call some of these experiences as small t's, but the cumulative effect of those, imagine having to experience that over a period of years, almost every day, not having a place to go. It's quite impactful, obviously.
How would it show up in an adult life?
So in an adult life, so it goes, if for example, obviously children go to therapy.
Yes.
If say, for example, parents stay within that relationship, that never gets resolved in therapy, or, the child never comes out of that environment whether it's the mother leaving the relationship or anything like that. So that stays on. If that never gets addressed, then you have a teenager who's running amok. You have a teenager who is probably aggressive, or you have a teenager who's very inhibited in their emotions, which means that they have learned to just suppress and just accept what it is. They about the stress responses, which is the fight, flight, or surrender. So sometimes it depends on, and with different types of, I guess, theories, we talk about fight, flight, and surrender. Or within there's a therapy called schema, whereby the child who has been abused can either surrender to the abuse, whereby they are victimized, they become quite vulnerable, and they grow up into being very vulnerable adults as well. Yes. You can either overcompensate, whereby you are basically copying what your abuser is doing. So you can also become an abuser yourself, or you can completely become detached to all of that and decide that I'm not going to do that. But also the detachment, I think it's not so much resolution, but how it can just be, you can choose to detach through resolution, or whereby you're making a concerted effort to say, I'm not going to do the same thing that was done to me. And, that's when, people do the work of understanding where they come from, understanding their context, understanding the impact some of these experiences had on them as well. So for some people who say, for example, if it's males who become perpetrators of domestic violence, it's very, very highly likely that most people who've been domestic violence perpetrators were abused, and not just physical abuse. They might not have been physically abused, but they might have been, really emotionally abused, and even sometimes even by their mothers. There's scapegoating, which is also another emotional type of abuse, or even neglected. So if you're basically I guess the experiences that you have during your childhood, we sort of recreate these things. And when you talk about, say, if you want to look at that through mental disorders perspective, most of the labels given to some of these trauma, obviously there's complex PTSD or PTSD. And some of the major symptoms of PTSD, for example, is obviously you have to have experienced the trauma. There's the re-experiencing of that trauma. And the re-experiencing of that trauma for an adult person looks like also recreating the same environment where that they came from as well. And then also there's the avoidance. So and I wanted to talk about avoidance in the sense of we do a lot of normalization of certain traumas in our own community as well. Because some of that stuff is too painful to go back to.
And nobody wants to go back to it.
It's really, really, really hard and uncomfortable.
Is it denial or is it just avoidance? Or is it both?
It's so when we talk about avoidance or denial, that's loaded. So it can look very different for different people. So you can either use humor, you can use anger to just avoid. So what's underlying, we talk about the anger iceberg. So what you see on top is anger, but underneath all of that, you're so scared. You're a child who was really, really hurt. And there's so much to it. There's so much to it.
My personal story would be, so in the context of a father wound, was my dad was there up until maybe I was 10 years old, and then my folks separated, and we lived with my mom.
Yeah.
And she struggled quite a bit with us, and dad was not involved.
Yeah.
How that affected me later in life is negatively is I thought, I don't want to be like him.
Yeah.
I also thought, I'm going to work so hard so I don't ever want to be like that. So I made up by trying to compensate by achieving things in my life so that I would be better.
Yeah.
And then also looking for validation and never feeling like I was enough. So that was the context for me. I share that to set up the question of, do you think males and female would react differently to a father wound? Do you think that would look different?
I think based on some of the stereotypes that we give gender, that's probably the only way I would look at it. So there's some stereotypes that we assume within the society as well. So there's obviously the childhood trauma that we've suffered, but how that looks like within our social context in the present is very different.
Yeah.
So there might be that, say, for example, a male might assume a violent behaviors because that's what men do. You're just angry because that's what men do, because of the stereotypes. But I don't know that there's specific, based on research, to be honest, there's specific way that a female responds to childhood trauma as opposed to males.
I was thinking more in the context of when you think about the roles a father and a mother play in especially in the very early stages of a child. So when a baby is born, the mother's job is to feed and to nurture and to provide emotional support. Such that if you remember some studies that were done, I think this is psychology, maybe Carl Jung again, and then, when the child is separated, even Erickson, and then when the baby is separated from the mother at an early age, they don't develop that trust with the parents, right?
Yes.
So the mother provides that emotional support. Fathers come maybe a little later in life, like in that initial stage of development, the father is not so needed like that. Not in the same way. He's needed, but not in the... Mom is primary. You're feeding that child. I mean, the child cannot feed if the mother doesn't feed them. The mother is looking at the baby in the face, and they're talking and they're laughing, and that's why I guess we talk about the mother tongue. Even when the child starts talking, they speak the mother tongue because their first language is mom's teaching them. But dads come in later, and what I've found out, and even Carl Jung, they would say that the father would give that child the foundation, because the father is the first person who socializes. He's the first person to socialize the child away from the mother. I don't know. He's the first other person. So mom is primary. The very first time mom gave birth to the baby. Mom is always with the baby, feeding all the needs of the infant are from mom. And then as they start to go, the child, they better learn other things. Dad is the next other person from mom, usually speaking. And we're talking about in the defined context of a nuclear family, dad is the next person. And the child begins to learn perhaps safety, that I can be gone away from mom and I'm okay. Dad's going to bring me back. So they learn that since I can be gone for a little bit, I cry, gives it back to mom. So they were saying that sometimes when a child fails to develop that trust, the validation that the dad, it's more like a foundational, it's something is a crack in the foundation of this child, the ability to relate to the other world. The world is not so safe, but mom is very safe. And emotionally, like for example, if the mother neglected that child, the consequences you see would be just very different. Like the primary trust, the child can never develop trust. They're going to struggle with that. As opposed to that. That was the context of that. And I've wondered if sometimes you'll see, like guys, I feel like the father's role is they speak to a guy. There's a validation that the father gives a son that you can't get from anywhere else. Without which you're never enough. Or maybe in a context, an uncle fills that role, or some other man. It could be a coach on the football field, but the boy constantly looks for that. So the father brings validation and tells the son, you're enough. The daughter, what they get from the father, and these are not set in any stone, is this concept of, I delight in you. Is a first relationship the daughter has with the opposite sex. Your dad is the first man that says you, I let you. That's why they say, for example, and I don't know why I got into this, I never planned to say this, but anyway, that's why the little girl will go and dress up and come and run to daddy and say, daddy, do you like it? They'll dress up and want daddy to say, oh yeah, you're beautiful, that affirmation. That if the child doesn't get that, there's a thought that later in life that girl can grow with that emptiness of looking for that valid, just to know that I'm beautiful, that I'm that you delight in me. And if they don't get that from dad, it can be a
that's
challenge
what
later.
We talk about daddy issues and we laugh about that, don't we? but
anyway,
I think
any thoughts?
Yes, I do. So again, I think I've mentioned schema therapy as well. And so schemas is what we were talking about. So a schema is the core beliefs that we over the years throughout, because of our relationships and experiences with especially our primary caregivers, within the attachment relationship with either mom or, sometimes, even fathers can be primary caregivers as well. So the core beliefs that we and core beliefs are about, what do I believe about myself? So it's about the self, it's about the other, and it's about the world.
The world, correct.
So you can either believe that, that's when you start thinking that I'm useless, I'm not good enough, I'll never be enough, things like that. Or you start thinking about, you start developing an understanding of people as, other people are not safe, I can't trust you, I can't, depend on you because, my most reliable people who were supposed to keep me safe never kept me safe.
Did that, yes.
The people I meant to rely on, I couldn't rely on because they let me down every time. And then the world around you is the environment that I always talk about in neurobiology. If the world around you, whether it's within your home, within, your community, if that was never safe, or, the world around you, you got hurt, but, your parents didn't keep you safe or no one else kept you safe, then you learn to believe that, the world around me is not safe. So that's what you're talking about. And schemas, so at the moment, so in schema therapy, I think they have 18 schemas. So there is different ways of looking at, so the mistrust, for example, if you've been abused, you develop a schema or core belief that I can't trust people because they abuse me.
People hurt
you know,
especially people who are close to you, right? Even
exactly. And then you develop things like, abandonment issues as well. That's another schema. There is also emotional deprivation, whereby you're deprived of, because of emotional neglect, where, if you had a mother or a father who never validated you, as you're saying, who never delighted in you, you develop this sense of no one cares about me anyway. You can either surrender to that or you can overcompensate.
True. Yes.
Yeah. So it's there's extensive I guess theoretical frameworks that talks to what you're talking about. And even, shame, for example. Shame is a core one as well, whereby
Huge.
we are not supposed to talk about our private issues, but also we internalize the shame so much that we never feel like we can, we never feel like we are good enough. You feel defective as a person as well. The other one is the victimization that I was talking about, the vulnerability to harm, because if you have been like physically abused, and men as well as, but mostly women, you find that lots of women sort of develop a sense of where they feel, and especially maybe could also have something to do with the patriarchal culture and the idea that men are the abusers more than women are. So lots of women tend to grow up feeling very victimized, and they're very vulnerable to harm and vulnerable to being exploited more than men. So maybe some of these things can have sort of a gender attached to them in that way. But there's also the entitlement, schemas whereby people really overcompensate. There's nothing to see here. I was not abused. Why are you trying to tell me that I'm traumatized? Sometimes even people will overachievement, people just, say, for example, business people out there can be monsters in business where they're just taking. And that's why sometimes, especially with politicians, you can see whereby people are just, stealing lots of people's resources, and you're like, is this even necessary? Do you need all of these resources when other people around you don't have enough? So some of those, they're also rooted in, yes, sometimes I think in our community we see people who are so successful sometimes, and we don't think, you think that that's making it because of a historical context of, because of our colonial history and the impact of that economic, the economic impact of that, because lots of, there's lots of poverty, then you think that because someone is financially well off, then they've made it in life. Well. Meanwhile, when you try to unpack and peel the onion, you find that there's so much trauma in all of that, achievement. It's always very interesting.
With I don't know, we our time is running short, but I'm having fun. I wish we had more time. It's loaded, and I know we can't finish this. Maybe we'll schedule at a different time. We can continue this conversation, but I'm just curious, in a context in Adelaide, so we have a lot of Africans living here, and we carry with us a lot from coming back from Kenya. I've read some books by Sudanese authors where the kids have told their stories and all the atrocities of what they went through. And that's an extreme, where they were child soldiers, where they were forced to kill people when they were little, and they did some horrible things when they were that. And then one day they were brought to Australia, and now they're like, okay, go to school and be a nice kid. And it's problem from there. It's an extreme example. These Kenyans, people who've come here for different reasons. You came here to go to school, but also our context shaped us in a certain way that is very different from what we have found here. And so, I don't know, we didn't grow up with the idea of going for therapy. And even in general, I think even in the West, therapy is also new-ish. Also even in the West, I still find people are still learning, and but I guess they're just a little bit ahead compared to us. speak to the guys. What do we do, and what is going to therapy a weakness? Why should we go to therapy? When should we go to therapy? Why is therapy useful to us, especially the guys?
Yeah.
I wonder.
I think I was starting to say at the beginning, understanding your history is really, really important. Understanding it in the sense of the events that happened to lead you here where you are. And for me, I was talking about understanding my grandparents' history. So there's the colonial history of the Kenyan society, but also understanding the context of my grandparents, the context of my parents. And now here I am, because I come from people, I come from, communities that, and also, like, for example, I do heavily identify with my grandmother, for example. And if I didn't have the information, obviously as a person who's trained in social work and as a therapist, I can go and do my own timeline that way, but understanding the theory behind what I'm looking at. So I'm looking for themes and patterns of my family context and
like, for example,
my cultural context.
Like what? Because most people can tell you, oh yeah, I know my,
yes.
Oh yeah, my dad was good, my grandfather was a chief, oh my mother.
Yes.
Like you can have that knowledge when you saying understand. What are you actually getting at?
So what are you looking at? So what I'm getting at is, you need someone to sort of to help you conceptualize your own history.
Give me an example. Like,
so for example,
you could use your life if you
like. So for example, for me, my own history, obviously there was my family context, whereby yes, there was abuse, there was periods of even financial stresses and things like that. There was violence as well. There was, so for me to be able to understand myself better, for example, I had to go back to look at my extended family as well. So growing up, for example, my mother used to tell my sister and I that, we used to talk about curses. Our family is cursed. But in therapy speak, that's not curses. These are intergenerational traumas. So I have a good understanding of the things that are intergenerational trauma for me. If I don't have that understanding for myself, if I've never sat down and thought about it, which I know lots of people within my family haven't looked back at our family history and thought about, this is intergenerational trauma, this is stuff, this is places I don't want to go, this is a relationship I'm not going to choose because I know where it leads. So if you've never sat back and thought about your own family history and how people have done relationships within your own family, you're almost inevitably going to repeat it, because the schemas, the core beliefs are so deep in you that it's just, and they're very pervasive. You repeat the same, you reenact that, and that's a PTSD thing. So you want to re-experience the same thing you've experienced before. So if you don't bring awareness to that, it's going to be very tricky, because you keep reenacting, re-experiencing it until you actually can recognize, this is a pattern that I've seen happen before. I've seen happen with my parents. I've seen happen with my aunties and uncles. I don't want to repeat that. So that I've come to that point because I have had bits and pieces of therapy of my own. Obviously I've done a lot of study in the area. But the thing I would say about therapy is, go to therapy, have someone who understands your cultural context, who will help you conceptualize and understand your own family history. Obviously, not everyone does timelines to be able to understand their own context in that way. That's my own personal practice. It's not like standard training practice. So you might come across information in different ways based on maybe an experience has happened, and you get asked by a therapist, where do you think that comes from? And then, you might be asked to think about your childhood. When was the first time you felt this feeling of, I feel like, where do you think, say, for example, the belief that I can't trust anyone, where do you think that comes from, for example? So I think you don't have to have therapy. You can read books, you can sort of, try and educate yourself, psychoeducate yourself into these concepts.
But do we have to study
at the same level as you?
No, you do not. That's why you have, someone who's educated in that. So you go to therapy, pay me a bit of money, and I'll take you through that.
Yeah.
But that's the thing.
Well, what are you creating in that space? There's, I guess I'm leading towards something. What do you want to create in that? Why are we reading? When you're reading, what are we looking for? Or when we're coming to therapy, what is it that the therapist offers you, in your opinion? What do you give someone when you come? Is it answers? Do you fix the problems?
Not at all. Not at all. So, for example, for example, for me, so I guess the therapist is just a guide.
To where?
Just a facilitator to you understanding yourself better. Because that's what I was trying to describe. It's about understanding where I come from to understand how I got here. It's about understanding yourself. But if you don't have the theoretical context, then you don't have someone to sort of translate that in a way that makes sense to you. In sort of being able to identify different patterns of, things that have happened, the intergenerational issues that have happened in your family. You don't have those words. But what a therapist does is sort of brings that awareness to you and says, I noticed that you use certain words because probably those are the words that are used in your family. Where do you think that comes from? And you also question just the default way of being, because sometimes I find that people just go through life, you don't question, you're not using your executive functioning very much to question, why do I do what I do? Why do I keep getting, for example, into these relationships which are so, dysfunctional and also damaging But until you can ask yourself these questions, you are going to keep recreating and re-experiencing the PTSD that you are, unless you actually answer that question: where does this come from? Why? As I said earlier, we're not just the individual who's sitting in front of us. We come from a context, and if we don't understand what that context is and how that affects us, how we talk to each other, how, we do relationships and the experiences that we have will keep just being, something that we don't really understand fully. And it's, I find all of it very interesting. Yeah. And, something I wanted to mention, and just to go back to a little bit of the reason why and I know sometimes we talk about, why do we care about the colonial history? These days I do some work for one of the unis as well, within social work. They've started teaching decolonizing social work. So decolonizing social work is talking to because conversations like these are coming up within the social work field in particular, because there's such an impact of the colonial history. So as people who've been colonized, there's so many things in us that we reenact that also come from that colonial history. And for example, I wanted to just mention, for example, the black tax, the burden of the black tax. For us as African people, and generally, I think lots of Black people have that. It's because of the impact of the economic issues that we've had, because of obviously the issues that we had with our colonial masters, who obviously took so much from us, and we still are recovering up until today. Here we are in Australia. we are trying to have a better future for ourselves, but it's also at a cost, because we have to support our, other people back home. That's a burden on us, when
it's just the way it is.
Yeah, when other people from other cultures are going ahead and don't have to worry about
the village,
the village and everyone in the family.
And going forward, thank you so much, Rachel, for sharing.
It's amazing. Yes.
Your story with us, your professional and personal. I really, like I said, and I don't think we can just sit forever and talk, but it's a first encounter. I hope we'll have many more opportunities to talk, because it's just multi-layered. It's
broad, it's multi-layered.
Can't exhaust in one area, and I hope that when you start your show, please do. You'll get opportunity to share with people. I feel like we're in a place where we need to disseminate information, because Rachel, I believe we have unique perspectives. The fact that, again, timeline, let me add to your timeline. So from 2013 to now, you're in Australia, that timeline, you've learned a lot of things.
Yes.
And I think it's time, and you've understood. So you've learned a lot in terms of, you've gone to school, you've been trained, you've worked and all of this, but you've gained so much understanding that I think it's time we start to download that and to help our communities and our people, and together with grow, because not everybody's going to be able to do a master's in social work to understand themselves, but you can break it down for us. So thank you so much. Your parting shots, if there's anybody out there, and again, it's just a guy's thing over here, we're trying to talk to men. If any man feels stuck out there dealing with some, and they may be aware, not even aware, maybe they're starting to think, maybe that's why I'm the way I am. What words of encouragement do you have for such a person?
I think try and do the work. Be brave enough to do the work. And when I talk about doing the work, it's reflecting. So I don't know whether everyone is familiar with that term, but you have to, stop and just think, why do I keep getting myself in these situations? Where can I get someone who can help me and guide me through and walk with me, help me see different perspectives? And you also have to be open to hearing that different perspective as well. And, I know, sometimes we'll go to friends and, sometimes, but we also go to our friends because sometimes our friends will tell us what we want to hear, or, which is not very helpful. So if you're ready to make changes in your life, it's possible. The other thing is also, I think we all have different coping mechanisms. Again, it's about also going back and, taking a step and just thinking, why do I cope the way I cope? If my coping mechanism is, going for a drink, then, maybe let's expand on that a little bit more. And the problem is not the coping mechanism as well. It's understanding why you do that as well, because it's not good or bad sometimes. Sometimes it's, I want to have a drink because of a certain reason. But if you're doing that on default, on automatic, when you don't really understand what's happening for you, you feel lost. But if you have a good understanding from, someone who can help you and sort of walk with you through that journey of understanding yourself a bit more, I think, you can get to the other side. And, again, for me, someone who's been to therapy in and out, I have all of this information. It doesn't mean that I have completely healed or arrived. My journey continues. I keep learning from different relationships I come across. So there's no arriving. So it's about just ongoing awareness, because at the end of the day also, I'm still developing. I'm still growing and developing as a person. Now I'm almost 35-year-old, and I'm going to be completely different at 40 or, in the next year. So there's never arriving. It's just a process of ongoing awareness of self, ongoing awareness of the world around you, the relationships around you. So don't ever feel like, everyone has arrived and you haven't. It's no such thing as arriving in this journey. It's an ongoing journey, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much, Rachel.
Yeah.
To our listeners, I hope this episode gave you something to reflect on, and those who might watch us on YouTube, because we may be somewhere on YouTube. Healing takes courage, but it begins with awareness and honesty. You're not alone, and you're not beyond restoration. If this resonated with you, share it with someone. And remember, it's not just a guy thing, it's a human thing.